Let's talk about arguably the biggest news of the week. Michael Bisping foregoing a retirement fight, instead opting to retire. He had hinted at this in the past couple of weeks, saying that it would take something really big to get him out, and it'd be nice to be out of the USADA pool, and et cetera, et cetera. He's hanging it up. What are your thoughts on the career of Michael Bisping?
No chance to become the middleweight champion of the world. Was once balked at, laughed at by Anderson Silva at one point, saying, while Anderson Silva was fighting all these other guys, Anderson's calling out Michael Bisping, and Michael Bisping really had no business being in the cage with Anderson Silva long before he actually fought Anderson Silva. Michael Bisping was the consummate, almost like headline maker, right? He, one of the original trash talkers, or to be able to take trash talk into the next level. He was a guy that just didn't give a rat's ass about your opinion, anyone's opinion. He was going to be who he's going to be. I had the pleasure of being there in person with many of his fights, a lot of press conferences, and a lot of time spent with Michael outside of UFC and mixed martial arts, whether it's in Las Vegas, here in Toronto. And just talking dude to dude, soccer to soccer, DJing to DJing, father to father, right? I got all the time in the world for Michael Bisping. Don't know if I believe him just yet, but the eye situation, it goes back a long time. And it goes back so long before this podcast went on the air, long before Fightful MMA wrestling online ever existed. There were many times Michael Bisping should have never taken a fight and was good enough to get past the medical clearance and compete almost with one eye. And the irony of having Jason Perillo as his trainer, who's blind in one eye. Right, so it's not. I guess not really irony. I guess it's kind of cool because Jason could obviously coach him and say, "Look, man, I had to do it. Here's what needs to get done." So I got a lot of time in the world for Michael Bisping. Although he knows if he watches this podcast, we still have beef that we're going to iron out next time he comes to Toronto, or if I catch him in Vegas, it's going to cost him a lot of money. He owes me flat out, and I'll get him. I'll get him. Just in general, it's Michael. It's Michael. So, I got his son on my side, so. He's got no shot, so we're good.
Son's a hell of a wrestler, I understand.
Yeah, he is.
So looking back at his career, I mean, he had the Ultimate Fighter 3 run, and before that, he was a highly touted prospect. I mean, he burst onto the scene in 2004, and he went 10-0 between 2004 and 2005, got the Ultimate Fighter thing, and to me, as a viewer, now keep in mind, I didn't get into MMA media until 2010. For that first half dozen years in the UFC, I looked at him as the villain.
Yeah.
Just the villain. He went to a split decision with a prime Rashad Evans at light heavyweight, which says a lot about him. But before that, I really saw him as the villain because what happened in his home country, he was gifted a decision over a deaf man that he shouldn't have been given. I was like, man, it doesn't get more heel than that. It doesn't get more heel than that. And then, of course, a couple of years later, he was coaching the Ultimate Fighter and just talking nonstop trash. And it seemed like at that point, his career was going to be defined by getting knocked out by Dan Henderson. It really looked that way. The turning point to me, and the vicious knockout that Wanderlei Silva gave him. Where it started to turn for me was the Chael Sonnen fight. Mm-hmm. Because it's kind of debated who really won that fight. And around that time, it was very clear several of the people that had been beating him, Dan Henderson, Wanderlei Silva, Chael Sonnen, later, Vitor Belfort, they were on some stuff. Whether it was testosterone replacement therapy, maybe something a little more extreme. Even Chris Lieben, who Bisping beat, tested positive for stanozolol. And he could never just quite win that number of fights that he needed to get to the title fight. And I started to feel for him because he was almost the elder statesman at that point. And he would have really exciting fights. Like he went to Macau and beat the hell out of Kung Lee. Had a great fight there. And then after the Rockhold loss, I was like, all right, this is going to be his final run. He's going to wind it up, or he's going to wind it down. Whenever he loses next, he'll wrap it up. I thought Anderson Silva beat him, quite frankly. I think Anderson Silva should have won that fight, but still, he beat Dalloway. He beat a very good Leites. Thales Leites at that point was reinvigorated. He beat Anderson Silva, and he stepped up to the challenge, left a movie set, and knocked out Luke Rockhold when hardly anybody was giving him an opportunity. Anybody was giving him a chance.
Yeah, other than his family.
Yes. I didn't think much of him fighting Dan Henderson, but the fight was awesome. The fight was great. I had him winning that fight over Dan Henderson. That's what I'll always remember Bisping about that. I won't remember him for the robbery against Hamill. I won't remember him for getting knocked out by Dan Henderson, as iconic as that may be. It's Dan Henderson's logo. Dan Henderson owes Michael Bisping some royalties, for the love of God.
Should.
And honestly, if the UFC wanted to create an MLB silhouette logo, you could make that silhouette of Dan Henderson doing that the logo, and it'd be fine. But I will remember Michael Bisping for a 3-fight series, really a 4-fight series, that he had at the end of his career with Silva, Rockhold, Henderson, Pierre. You could argue that there was no 4 fights in a row of anybody's career. Maybe Leonard Garcia could squeak in 4 in a row that were more exciting in continuity than those 4. What he was able to do between 2015 and 2017 was nothing short of incredible, and I have a lot of respect for that guy. And he is a wildly entertaining broadcaster and podcaster too.
Yeah, I wish we could get more of him up here. We do get a bit of it in terms of the broadcasting side. But yeah, that I mean, I remember that Anderson Silva fight, and I was like, damn, Michael won. All right, cool. And then the whole Luke Rockhold thing, I was like, yeah, this is not going to turn well for Michael. I wasn't a detractor. I just didn't like the matchup. I didn't like the way the two styles matched up against each other. And then, my goodness, when Michael landed that punch, and I was like, holy smokes, he's going to have the belt wrapped around his waist. How incredible was that? And then the flack that he took for wanting Dan Henderson as his first title defense. Well, why not? He wants to sort of avenge that silhouette of the logo. So yeah, and he was able to do it, although that was a very close fight. He was able to do it, and then eventually fights George St. Pierre and gets tapped out in the 3rd round after, something you really fell in love with was the fact that Bisping showcased what you can do with elbows in the guard, right?
I loved it.
He's changed. A lot of guys in the live chat right now are talking about when he spit in Rivera's corner, cementing himself as a heel.
Yeah.
So I'm telling you, man, Michael doesn't care about anyone's opinion. And I don't mean that in the media or talking about opponents. I've been with Michael Bisping and some of our mutual friends where I'm like, this guy is going to lose his marbles soon. We got to get out of here. He's fearless, man. He's a legit, not a thug, but a Brit with a heart, man. He wears his heart in his sleeve, and he's ready to rumble whenever, however. So lots of love for Michael Bisping.
And he has a plan for post-fighting. I mean, of course he could coach if he wanted to, but he doesn't need to. He's acting. I saw him in Den of Thieves a couple weeks ago. Really fun movie. I like that one. That movie made a ton of money. Although, it was more of a cameo. He was in the Triple X film, which did outstanding numbers. He's in Twin Peaks, which was a very popular show. He appeared on, I think, Strike Back. So he's been in a lot of different stuff. Also, podcasting, broadcasting. That goes a long way for him, too, with the personality that he has.